felt like I probably drifted through life where I had a natural talent for football, but not the application and the work ethic needed to get to that level. So I actually came up with the name YFit. So I remember my why, because like I said, reflecting on my journey up to that point, I didn't have a purpose of why I wanted to be a footballer. Like I said, it was the dream to have because it was just what everyone wanted to do rather than making it my dream. For me, it starts with passion. If you have two choices, when you believe in yourself, both are right. Whatever path you take, when you know what you're doing, what you're building, when you believe in yourself, when you're looking at it in terms of years and decades rather than days, months, then you realize, okay, wow, we took bumps, but we ended up where we need to be.
As I think about like things not being regulated, and especially with like wages just in general, and you see like the astronomical like fees which are paid, agents get paid, footballers get paid, but then most of the time the athlete is the one who ends up kind of out of pocket. And it's just, I don't know, I just feel like I don't know what it is. Well, maybe I guess I do. Maybe it's like the mentality you're thinking that something that comes so easily is going to stay forever. From your experience, do you see a shift changing? So like athletes being a bit more aware of the financial responsibilities they need to take on in order to keep their money for a longer period?
Oh, definitely. So one of my friends, he put on an event a couple of months back called the Athlete Investor Summit, which I was involved with. And it's about the education at the end of the day, because if you think about it, especially a lot of footballers come from working class, so they don't have that financial education or don't come from wealth. And then you got to think in your early 20s to 30s, all of a sudden you're earning ridiculous amounts of money. And obviously when they want to kind of maintain that lifestyle, you then got to be able to continue that. Because you think about a career, if you've done well, you got a 10-year career, you know what I mean? So by the time mid-30s, you finish playing. If you want to continue that lifestyle that you've had, you've then got to be continuing to make that kind of money. So that's where like the investments and those kind of things have come in. Obviously, I think it's also understanding their power too. So the leverage they have as brands in themselves, and understanding that will then help in terms of the longevity. But not all of them are going to think like that. You know what I mean? Because as I said, like the education and the knowledge hasn't been there. But
whose responsibility do you think that should be?
I think, at the end of the day, it's got to come down to you. Then got to take the initiative. Yeah. Obviously, structure. Yeah, because it's the same thing as just like speaking about they should teach about money in schools. Well, the system doesn't work like that, you know what I mean? Like if they did that, then they're not then in charge, you know what I mean? Then they can, if you then have the knowledge and the understanding, then they can't dictate how you should live and, you know what I mean, you should work for them or what you should work for. So I think it's then on you because the information is out there now, so it's accessible. So I think within that, then you got to take the onus on yourself to be like, okay, I need to learn these kind of things.
Yeah. I wonder within that as well, because it's not just like understanding you need to do investments, but then also the type of investments that need to be done. Because you hear crazy stories where like someone's accountant or someone's business manager has made them invest in something that doesn't exist, or like the crypto scams where they're putting their name on something and they haven't done any due diligence and now they've landed in hot water. I feel like that bit especially, like when you have so much money, you don't really care where you throw it, but then you don't know what harm you may be doing inadvertently either to yourself or to other people who follow what you're doing. It's quite interesting. Because I think like crypto especially is such a get rich quick scheme, and people don't really, well, I think now people are more wising up about it, but like when you know that, okay, my money's running out, if I put 100k on this, I could probably make like 10 million. And most people just want to do that of actually doing the hard work that's needed.
Yeah, I think that due diligence is the key thing. So that's where it's just like who's around you, who's giving you the advice. Because the same player would be like looking at their contract from the club or looking at the club that they're trying to sign for, who wants to sign them, doing the due diligence of like, is this the right place? Where my family going to go to, you know what I mean? In terms of the kids going to school, different places, what's the surrounding areas like? Where's the shops nearby? So you do your due diligence in that. The same kind of mindset has to then be applied with investment. Yeah.
And where does your like passion for sport come from?
So yeah, goes back way back. 8 years old. The dream was to be a footballer.
What team do you support?
I'm a United fan.
Your uncle took you to Manchester to see.
Do you know what my story? Because I always say like, when you're just a kid and you're seeing Ryan Giggs and Andy Cole and Beckham on the TV, that's it. Like, where,
winners,
you know what I
isn't
mean? Where I'm from, you know what I mean? I'm born and raised in Newham, East London, so that didn't, you know what I mean? That didn't register. Yeah, that didn't register. So like literally West Ham would be the local team. Leighton Orient. Fun enough, I grew up in North Woolwich, but whenever I'd say Woolwich, people would think South. You know what I mean? So it was actually North Woolwich, so just north of the river. So technically the closest team to me was actually Charlton Athletic. And funny enough, that was actually the first ever match that I went to as a kid. So I watched them face Arsenal, funny enough.
Who took you to that game?
My dad. Yeah, my dad. So my dad's friend was like, he worked at Charlton. So he got us tickets. So that was the first
That's a
ever.
good hookup though.
Yeah, that was the first ever game I went to. And Arsenal won 1-0, I remember. Overmars scored. And Bergkamp was just running riot. Like Bergkamp, like when you watch players in the flesh, it's so different to like Match of the Day or just on TV. And you just see the movement, just see the way they control games and stuff like that. So that's kind of where the love started. And yeah, like my ambition was to be a footballer. But I always say to people, for me, when I look back in hindsight, it was not necessarily my dream. It was the dream to have. You know what I mean? Growing up in these communities, a lot of the time, the desirable career outcomes are it's either rapper, something to do with music, or football, or any kind of sport, or you take the road life, you know what I mean? So those were the sort of the three options that I would see. And yeah, football was my main passion point growing up. Yeah.
I think especially if you're gifted, then you're going to want to put more emphasis on that. Right?
100%.
Did your parents also push you towards that direction, or was
Yeah, they were super supportive. So like, I got a young brother, younger sister as well, and me and my brother would always play after school, just play football in the park for hours and hours, and they would always support that. So I always respect them for that.
So then with you and thinking about like doing semi-pro football, when did that like kind of change in terms of you thinking to go pro or maybe not doing pro?
So the ambition was always to go pro. I did get watched by Chelsea when I was young. And it's interesting because I remember having a conversation with my dad later on, just in terms of how that worked out, because the Chelsea scout, we knew he was coming to the game and we actually got lost. So I only played like the last 5 minutes of the game and then the Chelsea scout didn't come back. And I always think, like, what if kind of thing, you know what I mean? But looking back on that, I just take the lessons from that. Because I said to my dad, I was like, it's interesting that because of the sort of failures of that, which I class as lessons now, it's interesting that my mindset would be completely different now. Like, say, if I had a kid and a Chelsea scout came to watch them and we were late and somehow only played 5 minutes and he said he would come again, mate, I'd go knocking at his door. I'd probably turn up to Chelsea, like, you know what I mean? So it's just that hindsight, but you don't know what you don't know, you know what I mean? And these are all lessons that are valuable later down the line. So the ambition was to always be a professional. I did have a few professional trials later on in life, in my 20s. And the story around that's interesting because I played semi-pro for a number of years and then had a health issue with my kidney. And that kind of realigned everything for me in terms of my life, my mindset, because it made me reflect on my life from a kid all the way up to that point.
How old were you at the time?
Mid-20s, yeah. And the doctor saying, I don't think you can play anymore. Got to rethink what you want to do.
Is that serious?
Yeah. So they said it was something genetically I was born with that just got worse and worse over time to where one of the kidneys stopped functioning. And then that's where I felt the pain and was in hospital. And it took about a year or so just to get back on my feet. But during that time, especially in the hospital, did a lot of thinking, you know what I mean? Because as I said, I felt like I probably drifted through life where I had a natural talent for football, but not the application and the work ethic needed to get to that level. Because a lot of people, you know what I mean, how many kids dream of being a footballer, but the odds on actually making it is less than 1%. You know what I mean? Especially at Premier League level, where even you look at the statistics now, Premier League, it's only about 3,500 players to ever play in the Premier League. Think about football's the biggest sport in the world. So you think 3,500 people to ever play in the Premier League, which is crazy. Globally, you know what I mean? So those are the kind of odds. So I just had the ambition, but didn't necessarily understand what it would take to get to that. So it's only when I had the health issues that kind of made me think, I've just kind of been drifting. Got this gift, got this talent, but not the work ethic that I need to make it to that kind of level. So got back healthy, but also thought, okay, what do I actually want to do longer term? Like we mentioned about footballers and sort of post-career. And I was always into sportswear. Growing up, Nike adverts, Adidas, Joga Bonito, the Nike adverts, you know what I mean? And how it was used as a sort of motivation and inspiration through the clothing. And that always stuck with me, because I remember like even conversations I have with my dad where he'd say, yeah, as soon as I got you those football boots, the new ones, you'd go and score a hat trick. You know what I mean? So that was the motivation. And it's just like, you feel like you're going to fly when you get them new Predators, you know what I mean? So that kind of nostalgia, I'm thinking, I'd love to create that. So I actually came up with the name Y Fit. So I remember my why, because like I said, reflecting on my journey up to that point, I didn't have a purpose of why I wanted to be a footballer. Like I said, it was the dream to have, because it was just what everyone wanted to do, rather than making it my dream, you know what I mean? So it was one where got back healthy and then thought, okay, let me actually give this a go. So actually when I started actually training hard, putting in the work, that's when the professional opportunities started coming, even in my mid-20s.
Seriously?
Yeah, so had some trials in LA, had a couple of trials in Europe, and then the health issues played up again. So it's just like, whoa. So it kind of, on one hand, was one regret, because it's like, if I'd put in the work earlier, probably would have made it. But on the other hand, I was just like, okay, look what happens when you have a talent for something and you match that with a work ethic and a drive, as well as a purpose. So I'd found my why, I'd found my thing, North Star. Okay, like this is why I want to become a footballer. Because I guess, and then a lot of it is to do with impact, because a lot of the time we're inspired by people, not necessarily in terms of what they do. That's the avenue of how to inspire, but it's just like how they make you feel, and what that kind of, the expressions that you can get from seeing someone do, you know what I mean, something at such a level. So that's why I was just like, okay, cool. Whatever I go going forward, whatever I do, I'm just going to put everything to that. And that's when, I discovered sort of entrepreneurship, and looked at, as I said, it took me about a year to get back to just normal health. So I did a lot of research in terms of how to start a company, manufacturing, sourcing fabrics, looking for different manufacturers, even just the technical stuff, because that's what sportswear is. It's very technical, just even in terms of the stitching, the materials you use for like sweat wicking, you know what I mean, moisture control, that kind of stuff. So it's one where obviously I played, so I knew how I wanted the stuff to feel and fit. I just needed to go and do the research, because I didn't have any sort of fashion background or garment background. So I just did that, you know what I mean? We've got the resources now, so the information is there. So it's just like literally Googling, reading books, different resources, different conventions.
But why fashion though? Because like, especially given your sporting background and like all the other avenues that you could have gone down when it comes to sports, like you could become a coach, you could have become a physio. Technically wise, you could have gone down the corporate route as well. Like even that angle, like why fitness, would you say? Why sportswear?
To be honest, I did still, you know what I mean? So Y-Fit was began for about 8 years almost. But I've had a variety of different roles in football, because I always say, like, for me, it starts with passion. And I've always someone, in terms of career-wise, going to say to people, like, other than sleeping, the most you're going to do is work. You know what I mean? Just in terms of hours. So I'd want it to be something that I enjoy doing. So all the jobs I've ever had is to do with sport or football. So my first job out of uni was working at the Olympics, which is in my home borough, Newham. Then I was a scout for a couple years, scouting young players. It was cool. It was fun. You know what I mean? Because it's about discovering the talent before.
It's like the shoes on the other foot now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's interesting, full circle with that as well. Because it's like you can then provide the opportunity. Because I always feel like, especially with football and sport, I think it's just a good life thing to have. You know what I mean? Just to go through. Just in terms of like being on a team, communicating, you know what I mean, going against the team that are trying to beat you, those kind of things. So you learn a lot of life skills with that.
Yeah, because like I was thinking, like, when you were doing the scouting, did that make you reflect on your own experiences and like what you did? Could have done better or didn't?
For sure, because a lot of it is to do with environment and just being in that right environment to nurture the talent. And I never really had that. So although I played semi-pro for a number of years, I didn't play at any academy, professional academy. And then my brother did, and I saw how he developed and how that helped him. So I guess being exposed to that kind of environment is definitely helpful for sure.
Yeah. So after scouting, what did you end up doing?
So then I was a football analyst. So worked for a company called Opta, who do all the statistics for like Sky Sports, BBC, all the betting companies. So I did it for about 3.5 years.
What were you doing?
So I was a live football analyst. So how it works is like, it's interesting because people don't realize that whenever you're watching the game and you see the number of passes, the possession stats, people are collecting that live.
Really? I
You
thought
know
that
what
was
I mean?
all automated. Like,
We use a software, but we're controlling all of that. And you know what I mean? So like you'd have an analyst per team. And like, let's say you're doing Arsenal, I'm doing Man U. Like you basically follow every single action that the Arsenal players do. And I follow every single action that the Man United players do.
literally everything. So like
every single
passes,
thing.
headers, everything.
Every single action. You know what I mean? So on average, we'd probably have about 1,000 to 1,200 actions per game.
How do you maintain your concentration for such stuff?
Do you know what? It's interesting because whenever I look back at the career, I think, as I said, having a passion for football, but then also understanding your skill set. So that's something, even like I speak in schools at the moment, and I talk about understanding what you're good at. And I was always very analytical, you know what I mean? Just in terms of, okay, seeing what's there, being able to identify what's there and, you know what I mean, put that down. So being an analyst, it kind of suited me. So like I remember going for the interviews and they'd trial you out and they'd be like, okay, you're good at that. So there'll be people who are like UEFA License A coaches and they'd see that, okay, you can't do that. So it doesn't match, you know what I mean? Whereas I had like my level 1, level 2 FA and like I loved doing it and it was really good. I was good at it, you know what I mean? So it kind of, I guess, suited my skill set. So that's kind of what made that a bit easier. But that was fun.
But at the time, you were still like questioning like purpose as well.
So this was before all the health challenges.
Yeah.
I would say I was just drifting. Yeah, and like I was still playing semi-pro at the time. I actually started YFit about 2.5 years into being an analyst. So I did YFit part-time whilst being an analyst for about a year or so. So the health challenges happened in between being at Opta. But yeah, like I said, like it was a job, you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, because sometimes like when you're like doing multiple things, especially at a job, because you can tell yourself, okay, do I want to like go up the ranks or do I want to change companies? Because especially in an industry such as sports, I feel like it's such a exclusive industry. Like once you're in, you never want to leave. Like I was at the Tottenham game, like I think like the third last game, something like that. And you just see like random people that work at the club. I'm like, how did you get a job here? Do you know what I mean? Because they just look like they just rocked up here and they've stayed for like 50 years because it's a team that they've loved. They're doing like different roles that are just like in pushing them, enjoying them. And like it's easy to, I wouldn't say drift as you would say, but it's easy to like coast and it's easy to be comfortable, especially when all of the opportunities are given to you.
For sure. So I think, it's a tricky one because when I was there, I enjoyed it, but because it technically wasn't a full-time job, so a lot of the time, like I'd go in, I'd probably do maybe 4 or 5 days a week and maybe a couple games a day. Obviously games are 90 minutes. So once you do that, then that's it. So I did have a lot of time to think, but then also I was still playing semi-pro as well. So obviously training twice a week and then playing on the weekends. And then you could accept or decline games, you know what I mean? So it's one where, even with that, I think one of the biggest lessons I had from that was timekeeping. So I pride myself on not being late anywhere because with that role, like they're not going to wait at Old Trafford for you to get to your, you know what I mean? And you're providing the stats live.
Oh, you were actually at the games?
No, we was in the office, we provide the stats live.
Okay.
So whenever you're watching Sky Sports News,
ready.
ready. And it's everything, you know what I mean? So if you're late a couple of times, you lose your job because how we do it is you do it by number. So whatever number the player is, that's what you're then putting in terms of their actions.
Oh, so you have to like memorize it or like see it on
so
screen.
the number, so if there's a late substitute or someone got injured in the warm-up, so then obviously there's a quick change in terms of a player coming in.
Oh, you're sharp,
you know what I mean? So you have to be, you know what I mean? So and then obviously you'd have the managers that would be looking over because especially with like goals and assists, that's all live. So you got to make sure that you're putting the right person in. So if, you know what I mean, if it's Arsenal and it's Saka scores, but you accidentally put 11 in this Martinelli, then that's going to show up on Sky Sports News. You know what I mean? So like that's how
You can use
know
your
what I
job
mean?
for that.
Literally. So a lot of the time, goals and assists are the stuff you get right. So we always aim for like 90% accuracy in terms of all the actions. And then you'd have someone who's a post-match analyst come in and just make sure everything's 100%. So you have someone that would go over the game you've analysed live and tweak anything. Because a lot of the time, sometimes it's interpretation. So
especially you can get techie because like I saw people complaining when something's an own goal, or is it really a goal, or is it a goal kick? Because people are betting. And like if you're aiming for X amount of hits or X amount of throws, then one mistake can mess people up.
100%. Because a lot of people would always ask me, it's just like, why wouldn't a computer just do that? But when you think about referees, it's human. You know what I mean? There's human error. So for instance, an example I give would be like players crossing the ball. It's taken a little nick off the opposite player and it's gone out, but the referee hasn't seen the little nick and he's given a goal kick. A computer would give the corner because he's seen, okay, it's taken the deflection of the opposite player. It's a corner, but the referee's given a goal kick, so we'd give a goal kick.
Do you think we're going to end up in a place whereby everything is all automated?
No.
You don't see that happening?
Nah, because I think they understand, especially in terms of the industry, they understand that the power of opinion and perspective, you know what I mean? Because that plays a lot into engagement, fan engagement.
Oh my gosh, yes, I just realised that now. It's actually, oh my God. It's not even about being right. It's about having a perspective.
100%.
Oh my days, I did not realise that.
100%.
Like, no one really cares. Like, they don't care about getting the answers right. Even like VAR, there's no incentive to make VAR 100% right. If you have it subjective, you get more people talking about it.
And how boring would it be if it's like, okay, it's right, that's it, and then that's it, the conversation done. Then there's no engagement, there's no need for YouTube and all these different things, there's no need for...
It all feeds each other.
Yeah, the presenters, the panelists, the analysts, the commentators. If you're not discussing the perspective of what you think happened, then where's the engagement in the industry? So I think
this is insightful.
Because you know what? I think even having worked in the industry, you realize how much is that and how much is almost perception. You know what I mean? Because like I always have conversations with my friends about even certain clubs about their business element and how like it might sound controversial, but some teams don't want to win. You know what I mean?
As a Tottenham fan, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I'm not even talking players.
Yeah.
You
I'm talking about squads.
Like even squads, like ownership,
yeah.
And the C-suite, they will have an objective. Like I'm a massive Man U fan, and I look at how the Glazers have been and just that whole hierarchy from a business standpoint. It's actually genius because it's just like, imagine you are in London and you've bought a house 20 years ago in prime real estate in the West End, central London. You haven't had to renovate it at all for 20 years, but the value is skyrocketed. That's good business. That's how Man United are. You know what I mean? The training ground is the same. That's why Ronaldo was complaining on the injury. You know what I mean? The training ground's the same from when he left all those years ago. I've been to Old Trafford and like the roof leaks, you see the cracks.
Oh my God.
And Man U, as of last week, is still the most valued club in the world. Even without the on-the-pitch success. Like, that's how much nostalgia and history the club and, you know what I mean, brand power that they have. And as a fan, that's horrible because I'm just like, sometimes you actually need to be in the mud for the changes to happen. So luckily with the new ownership group and their perspective of actually having the pride to have good on the field, on the pitch results, that's now maybe going to change some things and we might see some elevation in terms of success on the pitch. You know what I mean? Winning the FA Cup, hopefully that'll be a start to that. But from the Glazers' point of view, who are not necessarily invested in the success in terms of on the pitch.
They see it as business. They don't see it as a fan.
You know what I mean?
Fans,
exactly. Yeah. So it's business for them. So they haven't had to do much and the values just continued rising. So from a business standpoint, it's just like, okay, cool. Whereas I think other clubs are a lot more dependent on the results on the pitch. You know what I mean? So then would then raise the expectations of their fans. So if you're a team that, you know what I mean, like a Bayer Leverkusen right now, having gone unbeaten, like now what do the fans expect? Because now if you finish second next year, that would actually be a good result if you go by
the trajectory previous to last season. Yeah,
but now your fans expect you now to win the league. You know what I mean? So then that plays into the hands of, I guess, looking at it from a point of view of what's the expectation from the fans. Because if the fans are expecting something and they have a level of expectation, that then feeds into the business and your expectations as a club. And then if you don't meet that, then now sponsors are like, oh,
what's going on
here?
Yeah.
So then obviously then that's a big revenue source. So then even match days, you know what I mean, they're not selling as much in terms of match day tickets and stuff like that. And the social media is not vibrant how it was when you were unbeaten and you won the league. So that all then feeds into the business. You know what I mean? So a lot of the hierarchy will be like, oh, nah, we prefer maybe the underdog mentality. You know what I mean? Even a club like Arsenal, where it's just like, Arsenal should have just bought a striker 3 seasons ago and probably would have won the league this season if they'd, you know what I mean? But the fans, like, I always, like, it sounds controversial, but I always see Arsenal as, like, especially now, as an almost club. And that's the model, because the fans are engaged so much and then you nearly do it, but that's now giving you fuel. It's just like, okay, next season we'll do it. But you said that last season, and then next season, and you still didn't address you need a striker. You know what I mean? So it just depends. So it'll be interesting to see their off season this season and how aggressive they are in the transfer market, because that will give you a lot of emphasis on, okay, like, do we really want to win?
Are they serious?
Because the owners, you know what I mean, they've won a Super Bowl. They're
good.
They've won in the American sports. They've won the trophies, the big trophies, and they were willing to do what it takes to make that happen. So hopefully that translates with clubs. But there's a lot that goes into the kind of politics of football in terms of, you know what I mean, what you're trying to achieve and if that aligns with the business. So with a club, like I said, with Man U, there's so much history and nostalgia and brand power that you know what I mean, I guess the commercial stuff, it outweighs what you're doing on the pitch, which is crazy, because as a fan, I'm like, I want my team to win. But if them not winning doesn't have any repercussions in terms of repercussions off the pitch commercially, and the owners are still happy that they're making money, then right for them, they're laughing.
Yeah, no.
As a fan, it's just like, right, this is painful.
It's like you're playing with my emotions.
Yeah, 8th in the league and this and that. But then that all plays into the business, because it's like, no matter what, that's why it's just like the football industry it's amazing on one hand, because it's like, you've got lifelong fans. I'm still going to go and buy the Man U shirts. I'm still going to go to the games no matter where they finish, because that's the club I love, you know what I mean? So that's where it's actually a great business model too.
It actually makes sense. Like, I've started watching Welcome to Wrexham. Have you watched it?
Nah, not yet.
Yeah, so I'm only like 1 or 2 episodes in now, and like we're at the stage whereby the team didn't get into the playoffs, and so now they've sacked management and they now need to rebuild. And I think when you have that kind of focus in terms of here's the objective, like I think like an objective just getting promoted each year is like a strong objective, you can do it. But then as to your point, like the nearly making it, like just top 4, like just top 4, just top 5, or we don't want to get number 1 because then that sets the expectations for everyone to be higher, and therefore we have to spend more money, and that means less money, less profits for everybody. Like, people just want a simple life, a simple business. And like, even talking of the politics, like the politics happen off pitch. So you worked at Rock Nation Sports as well, right? What did you do with them?
So help them in terms of opening a London office.
Yeah.
So obviously they're known as talent agency, talent management. Obviously started in the US. Sort of Jay-Z's blueprint in terms of, like, I remember him saying early he'd get athletes coming up to him talking about what should I invest in? How have you been able to get your business structure right? And he'd give that advice, and then thought, okay, let's actually create a company that does this, you know what I mean? So they started off in music, and then ventured out to sports, obviously primarily the American sports. And then I've gone into football over the last decade or so, and then decided to actually have a base here. So that was in 2019. And I remember it was interesting because at that time, I'd gone full-time with YFit, but too early. So
why too early?
Because I'd run out of money. So like, I'd actually went full-time for like 2 years. Even looking back now, thinking, how did I even...
What made you decide this was the time to go full-time?
Like I said, I was at Opta at the time. See, the football career didn't work out. But as soon as I started doing the sports, I realized, right, this is what I can be elite at. Because even when I speak in schools now, I say to the students, I was just like, if I didn't have my health issues, I probably would have made it as a professional footballer, but I would have been average. And I like being elite. Yeah, you know what I mean? So like one of the core pillars for YFit is excellence.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And people want to be associated with excellence. People are impacted by people who are excellent at things. You know what I mean? So it was one where as soon as I started doing the sportswear, it just felt so natural. And like, that's why I think, all right, I found my thing. Because I remember a quote, it was just like, everyone has Michael Jordan level talent at something. You just need to find that. And
what did you find was your like unique talent in that area? Would you say?
I guess being a sportswear entrepreneur, because like I said, when I look back at
sorry, was it like one thing? Was it like the designs? Was it the manufacturing? Was it making connections?
Everything, like the whole embodiment of having a sportswear brand. Because I realized that it was just basically a list of the different skill sets that I have all in one. So from the design, from understanding even like consumer behavior, understanding marketing, understanding how to build a brand. And I'd say, yeah, initially the design part, because like I said, playing, I knew how I wanted the stuff to feel it fit. I just needed to then do the actual learnings of actually what manufacturers to use, what materials to use.
Yeah, because a lot of people have ambitions to start within like, say, clothing, right? But then one of the biggest challenges at the beginning is that, okay, the design, but actually trying to find a manufacturer and getting samples because they can be so costly for like one-aways. How did you, like, I guess, overcome that first hurdle?
I was so motivated at the time. Like I said, it probably took me about 10 months to find the right manufacturer. And I feel like a lot of people, like I'll say, like, if I'm on Google, I'm on the 300th page searching, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's where the difference was to where it felt so natural to me. I was willing to just put in whatever it took to make it happen and get the initial designs done. So I think that's always the difference, because people be like, oh, I haven't found a manufacturer. And I asked them, it's just like, well, how many have you spoken to? They'll be like 10. I'm like, try 2,000 and then come back, you know what I mean? So I think the work, but then also, like I said, the talent. So for me, it just felt natural. It was just like, because I knew the right questions to ask. I knew where to look, you know what I mean? I knew how much time to spend on certain things. So where it felt natural like that, I think is where, to be honest, even lasting 8 years. Because when I look back on it, I think like logically, like business wise, it don't make no sense. The sportswear industry is dominated by 3 or 4 brands.
Yeah. It's hard.
It's the hardest thing. And like I said, even in terms of with the statistics of making it to the Premier League, it's the same with business when you actually look at the numbers as well and the figures, especially a successful business, profitable business. So I'm trying to now do a business in sportswear. But like I said, the difference was I'd found my thing now. You know what I mean? So although the odds of becoming a footballer or successful sportswear entrepreneur are both very bleak, it just felt more natural in the sportswear. You know what I mean? And that's why I think I've been able to last up till now. You know what I mean? So
then, because you mentioned like at the 2-year mark, you basically run out of cash. Yeah. So then at that point, you started rethinking the timing of when you went full time. Did you also start rethinking in terms of like your strategy and if this is the right thing?
100%, because I always say to people, it's easy to start a business, it's hard to build a brand. Because I come from a very logical background. Like me, like as much as I was inspired by the big sportswear brands growing up, if the football boots helped me win, I'd wear them, no matter what the brand was. And I'd sort of taken that into business and then realized that people don't care actually about the product. It's actually the brand. They're not buying the product, they're buying the brand. They're buying what the brand stands for, what it represents. So that's where I then had to do more of the learning. Because even in uni, like if I was to go back and study, I'll probably study something like consumer behavior or psychology to actually understand that, because you don't realize how much goes in until you actually start a brand. You know, you having a brand, you realize, you know what I mean? Even the statistics of you need to see something 7 times before you buy it. Like, so subconsciously, you don't understand that. But as a brand, you need to understand that because you're trying to acquire these customers. So I just needed to do more learning in terms of how to present the brand. And it's funny enough where one of my friends, so it's interesting because I'm part of a WhatsApp group called 10 by 10. Shout out to Andy Davis. And that's where I connected with a lot of entrepreneurs. And Andy would have this sort of safe space where a few entrepreneurs will come together and we'll just talk it out and say, like, obviously it's hard, run out of money. So I'm there explaining like, oh gosh, like, I'm not sure if this is really going to work, because imagine I've got like great products and I'd compare my products to any brand, but no one's really buying it like they should, or like I'd want them to. Like, where's the disconnect? And then one of the other guys, shout out to Alex, he was just like, oh, I actually saw that. Because I actually said, I'm actually looking for a job to maybe help, you know what I mean? Because I'd run out of money. Because I always say with entrepreneurship, you either have time or money.
Yeah, it's one of the two.
You know what I mean? So, you know what I mean? You put the time in, run out of money, you get the money, you know what I mean? You don't have as much time, you know what I mean? So I'd put the time in and run out of money. So then I'm thinking, okay, cool, let me get a job, which will then mean, okay, I can get the money, but then it will then take away from having the time to put into the brand. But it's give and take. And I always say there's always seasons, you know what I mean? The chapters. So Alex was like, oh, I saw that actually, like Rock Nation are planning to open an office in London and they're looking for people. Thinking, okay, wow. Because I always say, like, leverage your skill set. There's always something to sort of lean back on and have, you know what I mean? Because that's always there, because sometimes you need to take the leap of faith. So I'm glad I put in the 2 years full time, you know what I mean? Because it helped build a foundation to then, you know what I mean? So then I was just like, okay, cool, I've done that. I've learned a lesson, run out of money. Now let me go get a job and get some experience. And to this day, that's probably the best experience I've had in terms of a job. And there's different layers to it. First and foremost, understanding the power of branding. Mm-hmm. So obviously Rock Nation, Jay-Z, you know what I mean, one of the most famous rappers, biggest rappers, even just his brand. And just like, it's something that I'd wish a lot more people here in the UK, especially like black people, could actually work for an American company that's black owned, because it changed my whole perspective on things.
In what way?
One, just how audacious Americans are in terms of their mentality. Like, imagine I'm here in London in Jay-Z's office looking after some of the biggest footballers in the world for a rapper from Marzi Projects who actually doesn't know that much about football, but his brand spans so far that he's able to just do what he wants to do, you know what I mean? So seeing that, thinking, right, like there really is no limitations on what can be achieved. You know what I mean? Like, he's come from a similar surrounding that I've come from in a different country. Obviously, yeah, he's leveraged his talent, he's leveraged his brand to that kind of level, to where you're audacious enough to go into the football market in Europe, where there are a lot of bigger players, but the allure of a Rock Nation and a Jay-Z is what will help you get players that really you don't have the audacity to, you know what I mean? And that's branding, you know what I mean? So learning that, I was thinking, whoa. So it's still that underdog mentality as well, because it's like, as I said, there are way bigger agencies, but we're looking after Kevin De Bruyne, we're looking after Marcus Rashford, Romelu Lukaku, and these top players. And that's because of what Jay-Z and the Rock Nation, what the team, what they've built. So going in and seeing that from the inside was just very valuable, you know what I mean? So I was thinking, okay, this is something I can take away. The second point I'd say is it's a safe space. It was a safe space. And I have a lot of friends who work in corporate jobs or this and that, and they're always complaining about, can't be yourself, these kind of things.
Code switching, all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's one where, for me, I'd always pride myself on being in environments that are nurturing, you know what I mean, and allow you to be yourself. So, like, I always give the example of, imagine, like, I'm going to interview for the Rock Nation role that's based on entrepreneurship, one which Jay-Z embodies, rap music, he's my favorite rapper, football, the thing I love the most, you know what I mean, black culture. So me now going into this interview, it's actually at my advantage now.
Yeah, they want you.
Exactly. If someone else gets the job, that means it's like, right, I'm not as tapped in as you know what I mean? Like, there's no need to code switch. There's no need to try and fit and mold into something I'm not to try and get this role. So the fact that it was all those things, because they actually put it out publicly. Like, they put it on Twitter, it's like, we're looking for, and they only hired 3 people. But I'm just like, no one really knows much more music about like Jay-Z's music more than me. not like I have this set of skill set within sport and football, and I have that entrepreneurial mentality because like we probably had a team of like 10, 12, you know what I mean? So although it's a big company globally, this is them starting out. So it felt like a startup, you know what I mean? So that was the kind of mindset. So my role there, I was doing commercial stuff, brand partnerships, I was doing recruitment. So, you know what I mean? I was doing analysis in terms of watching clips. I was going to games, watching players, as well as doing like, you know what I mean, brand collaborations with players and brands, and finding brands that align with the players, and you know what I mean, talking about, because their model is 360 management. So it's not just on the pitch, it's off the pitch as well. So go and doing investments, and you know what I mean? So even like I said about like that Athlete Investor Summit, like that's kind of the stuff that we'd be doing and educating the players on, and then be understanding, okay, like you've only got a short window, although you're making a lot of money. If you want to be able to maintain that lifestyle, you need to make good decisions in terms of, you know what I mean, investments and what you're trying to do in the long term, because if you finish your career at 35, you still got, you know what I mean?
30 years
exactly,
of life minimum.
Literally, you know what I mean? Even working life, 30 years,
Working
you know
life,
what I mean? You know what I mean? So this is like, find those kind of things, but then also let your money work for you, let your brand work for you, because essentially Jay-Z's taken his blueprint and he's systemized it for, you know what I mean, for the talent. Because at the end of the day, especially where, like, you know, full circle in terms of what we're talking about, working class and understanding where these athletes and these musicians, where they come from. A lot of them come from the ends like us, you know what I mean? So don't necessarily have the education. So what Rock Nation provided was that education, was that safe space and community to be like, okay, you're going and talking to a brand, here's what you should be demanding. Here, you know what I mean? Here's how the contract should be laid out. So, you know what I mean? Because Jay-Z and that, they were learning from what they went through. You know what I mean? Especially in the music industry. When you look at the music industry,
Shocks,
like, you know what I mean? Similar to even like, I even compare it in the business world to like the VC model, to where, you know
here's
what I mean?
some money, you got to pay us back.
Exactly.
We hope you do it, otherwise you're contracted.
Exactly. So the VC, they could give 10 brands 1 million, and obviously they want those returns, but it only takes that one brand to pop. So what about the other 9? You know what I mean? And I think it's actually rethinking just the mentality from our communities, because like I said, growing up, trying to be a footballer, it's almost just like, if you didn't make it, now you looked at it as a failure. But then you look at the percentage of how many people actually make it. So that's the 99% of guys in our community that, because they didn't make it as a footballer or as a rapper, now they're seen as a failure. So you got to think about what that does for your mental health. You know what I mean? So,
because on that, like rejection is one of those things that everybody is felt. No one likes to get rejected. No one likes to fail. So, and when you're associated with something, like, let's just say you've always been good at football, so everyone's told you you're sick at football, so everyone's expecting you to make it. It could even be your business, like, oh, you've been working on this business for such a long time, everyone associates you with it. So how do you build up that kind of mental strength? Because to work on your business for 2 years, it takes character to actually admit to yourself, I need to go get a job. And it's such a blessing, the fact that you got like the most slam dunk job ever, where you're getting paid to learn in the industry, where everything just makes sense. So like, how do you build up that character? Like, how do you reframe your setbacks or your delays in order to set you up for future success?
Because I think it comes down to self-belief. Because even when I say, like, if I made it as a pro, I would have been average, I think that's not from a place of lack of confidence. It's more self-awareness and just understanding, okay, this is what you're supposed to do. So as soon as I embarked on the entrepreneurial journey, I realized that this is me. So no matter what path I take, I trust in myself, I trust in my intuition, and I trust in the vision. You know what I mean? Like, I called it Wife It for a reason. So it's just like, for me, it's a visual reminder. Remember why you're doing this. You know what I mean? So where things happen, where it's thinking, this technically is failing, but then I land that kind of role. It's just like, wow, like God works in mysterious ways kind of thing. You know what I mean? And I always say, like, especially if you have 2 choices, when you believe in yourself, both are right. It's just that the path, you know what I mean? It's interesting. You called it podcast, the shortest path. That's the key, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, whatever path you take, when you know what you're doing, what you're building, when you believe in yourself, it'll be the right one. It might be a short-term mistake, but in the long run, you know what I mean? When you're looking at it in terms of years and decades, rather than days, months. You know what I mean? Then you realize, okay, wow, we took bumps, but we ended up where we need to be because, like I said, if I didn't go through that and actually work at Rock Nation, my whole perspective on even business, of how to actually structure business, would have been completely different. Because like I said, like working for a black-owned company at scale was really empowering.
Gives you
know what I
belief,
mean?
you know.
100%. And seeing that from the inside and thinking, wow, like this is someone who's leveraged their brand to these kind of levels.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like in the creative industry.
I like how you put it because you don't see that enough. Like even just coming here to go into Mass's office and everything like that, it gets you excited because you can
100%.
see what people can build, especially people that
100%.
look like you, right? And like America, they always say like if you go somewhere like Atlanta, it's like the Black Mecca or whatever because everyone there is just up. And so that in itself, to spend time in the business, seeing things grow from the ground up, like what it can do for you mentally is like insane.
100%. Because you think about like growing up, like if you can't see it, you don't feel like you can be it. You know what I mean? So
and it taps into your lack of belief as well
100%,
because you start believing what people tell you is true.
Exactly. And that's where it's just like, I remember reading the Shoe Dog book the other night, and I'm reading this and I'm thinking, right, this sounds like me. Because it's like aspiring athlete, failed athlete, then goes into sportswear, builds up this brand, purposeful brand. And I realized, right, it's like me. But then if I looked at Phil Knight, that doesn't resemble me. So where I always say is it's like, I thought like I wanted to be like Mike, but I'm actually more like Phil Knight. You know what I mean? So Michael Jordan's who I saw, Ian Wright's who I saw, Rio Ferdinand's who I saw. You know what I mean? So that's why it's just like now you're seeing different. So that's what's like I love speaking in the schools because they'd probably have never seen someone who's black who runs a sportswear brand.
Yeah, it's true.
And when you look at all the sportswear brands and even just their DNA and how what I always call like we got the source. Black culture and hip hop culture is what's helped build, you know what I mean, these companies. But when you look at the ownership, when you look at the C-suite, you know, that is not represented, you know what I mean? So that's why I was just like, I always talk about perspective because even working at Rock Nation, and I'll speak to my friends who work at corporate jobs and they're like, don't get me wrong, I believe in diversity, you know, DE&I, like I believe in that, but I think our strategy needs to be adjusted in terms of as a community, because I will see a lot more people putting effort into D&I instead of just supporting black businesses who are able to scale and then just hire and build out that diversity, you know, and build out that perspective, because diversity is just different perspectives at the end of the day. So I'm now at Rock Nation and it's you know what I mean, we're the minority, but we're the majority in this. And do you think there was a head of diversity at the company?
No one cares. Just do your job. Yeah.
That's it. There's no head of diversity, head of inclusion, because the company's diverse. The company's inclusive. So obviously I understand that that's just the way the system is. And some people say it's pandering to an extent, but, or they're doing what they can. But I also believe, like, it's interesting where you talk about the shortest path. I also believe in the most peaceful path, because I'll look at certain statistics or certain things, whether it's VC or, you know what I mean, less than 1% go to black businesses, out of not a lack of confidence, but more understanding. I probably wouldn't even go for that because, yeah, don't get me wrong, you can be the 1%, but also think about, like I said, the mental health element of it. Like, what are you doing to get into that? So people be like, push through in your role, this and that. But you're literally like, you know what I mean? You're getting trauma, basically trying to pursue a career, you know what I mean? Whereas the peaceful path, yes, a longer one, but you can be yourself. Like I said, working in a company where it's a safe space, you know what I mean? I can be myself. It's built on things that I grew up on, you know what I mean? So that's why I was just like, we don't have enough of those options or perspective, especially here in the UK, you know what I mean? It's way more in America, but it's just like, where are the scaled black businesses that are hiring our people, you know what I mean, to be able to give them that safe space. Imagine like loving your job, going into work
and just enjoying it.
I'm like, even I'm wearing my own brand to the office. Like, there's not, you know what I mean, there's not, oh, you got to wear this, or you can't wear that, because there's none of that. And you know what I mean, and even where it kind of even mirrors even just the way Jay moves, you know what I mean, he moves on his own accord. Like, you know what I mean, oh, you want to work with us, it's got to be to this level, you know what I mean, like it's on these terms, these are the terms, because he's got that leverage. So it's about then strategizing, building that, because a lot of the time, because even like we had a billboard in London last year with YFit, and I'd actually get messages from people just like, oh, that's amazing, but like, oh, I wish you picked me. You know what I mean? But then there will be the same people that will go to the other brands who pick the one black person as, you know what I mean, token marketing. But then I will turn around and be like, well, if I've got the support, then I'll be able to do that more at scale. But we're trying to build, you know what I mean? So I guess it just depends, because a lot of the time it is to do with clout as well. You know what I mean? In terms of, okay, you want to work with the big brands, and I get that. You know what I mean? We're not a big brand yet, but there's a vision there and we're trying to build to go somewhere, you know what I mean? So big brands turn into, you know what I mean? Small brands turn into big brands, you know what I mean? So it's one where it's just like, I'm encouraged by just even our generation of entrepreneurs who are aspiring to build to those kind of scales, because, you know what I mean? Like, I do believe I could build the next Nike or Adidas or these kind of brands, you know what I mean? With the support and with the vision and just understanding the what I'm actually trying to do, you know what I mean? So I think that perspective is important and key. And like I said, working at Roc Nation gave me that insight to see, okay, right, this is something that's actually been done. And having worked in there and seeing just how they move, it gave me that kind of insight that I needed to be like, okay, once the time comes, I'll go full time again on YFit and what I'm trying to do.
I mean, it sounds like it left like a huge impression on you, bro.
100%.
Like, in all different areas, because what you mentioned, there's a few things you mentioned actually that I want to try and pick up on. Cause like, there's one you said about the peaceful path. Yeah. And the peaceful path is interesting because you have to choose, are you choosing the peaceful path of yourself today or the future you? And so when I say that, the peaceful path could be you staying at Roc Nation at that time, but you saw your why, you saw your purpose. You're like, no, I need the peaceful path of where I'm trying to get to, which means I'm only here for a season and therefore stepping back. And I think sometimes you can get distracted in terms of your short-term versus your long-term goals. And if you stay too focused on your short-term goals, forgetting about what your long-term, 5 years has passed and you haven't even moved past the point that you should have in terms of milestone. And then secondly, when it comes to like leverage and brand and being able to put your network or your resources in places that are adjacent to yourself, or bringing people along the journey with you, especially when it comes to support. And then that kind of reminded me of what you do with Fit for the Culture, in terms of like not only using that as a platform to help yourself like elevate, like in terms of creating a community, but also helping fitness influencers elevate themselves and be able to project what they're doing, find new customers, find new clients to all these different people like across the world kind of thing. Is that your motivation for building Fit for the Culture?
100%. And I think this is where the beauty of business is and entrepreneurship and that journey, because sometimes like life is interesting to where it will just throw things at you, because even like the transition from Roc Nation into full time was interesting because like COVID had hit, contract had run out, and I was kind of almost forced to just go full time on YFit again. And Fit for the Culture was just kind of taken off, because even that story is interesting because imagine I'm in the football industry, I've got access to top elite talent, but technically I actually can't give them my stuff because they've got specific deals with the other sportswear, the big sportswear brands. And that's what's interesting about trying to penetrate in a market where it's very saturated and it's, you know what I mean, there's a lot of money in that. So you've kind of got to humble yourself and be like, okay, where can I actually build? So that's where I actually looked at sort of the fitness space. So like I said, YFit's been running for 8 years, Fit for the Culture's been running for 7, but that accidentally became a second business because I'd get messages early on from like fitness creators, personal trainers. They saw that I'm highlighting diverse talent and they want to collaborate. At the time, it didn't make financial sense to just give them free products because that's what they were asking for. But it kind of like using my analytical mindset kind of made me look at the scope of this sort of fitness space. And I hadn't really heard of it or seen it. And then you see brands like Gymshark and these kind of brands that have been able to build within that space. But a lot of the time, especially then, so this is, like I said, 7 years ago, there was no representation within that. So that's just like, okay, it kind of makes sense why they're coming to me, even though YFit probably didn't have 500 followers at the time. But it kind of made me think, okay, what do they really want? So it was exposure and awareness. So that's when I created a separate platform called Fit for the Culture. And yeah, within 18 months on Instagram, I got to like 100,000 followers.
How did you grow it?
So I saw two pillars. One was I would basically post famous celebrities working out, whether it's Serena Williams, LeBron James, Paul Pogba. Because one thing I also understand is, especially with consumerism, I was saying that nobody cares until everybody cares. So when you're now putting something online, if I'm out there trying to push my stuff at the beginning, no one's really going to care. Although there's a story there and you're building, and that's always a good thing to look back on, because I'll look back on Fit for the Culture when I had 7 followers or 8, you know what I mean? And Why Fit when it was early on and made 3 sales in a week and those kind of things. But that's the process, you know what I mean? So it's about understanding your process. So I understood, okay, people want to come online and see things that they're familiar with. So I'd post celebrities working out, and I guess it depends on the value proposition. So it's just about bringing value. So I would go online myself and look at different people working out to then take for my workouts when I'm trying to train. So I think, okay, let me create that platform. So I'll start off with doing celebrities, and then the second pillar would be community building. So I'd say to people, tag Fit for the Culture when you're in the gym doing your workouts, and I'll repost it. So it became like a community blog star page. And obviously when they'd see that I'm posting Serena Williams and then I've got you next, that association, you know what I mean? So then that's where it kind of built gradually from there, and then almost flipped on its head to turn to where I rarely post celebrities now. It's all about the community, but that's when it's now built at scale, you know what I mean? So like I said, 18 months, got to about 100,000 followers on Instagram. And that was almost like validation of, there's a need here within this niche, you know what I mean? So building a brand from scratch, I always focus on the power of niche. Because like I said, the levels of access at the more saturated, bigger markets, it's harder for a brand with not a lot of resources and starting up, you know what I mean? So you got to kind of find your way in a sense. So that's where I was just like, okay, this is strategic because I'm building an adjacent platform that also helps YFit, because I can then promote on Fit for the Culture, as well as actually just connecting with all the influential people within that space. So right now within that space, I will know all the sort of Black creators, diverse creators, ones that do well and perform well. I'd actually, because one of the business models is that people pay to get promoted on, they pay to get promoted on there. So if I'd see someone that their content has done well, I just hit them up and say, actually, you know what? I actually own a sportswear brand as well. I'd love to just send you stuff. You do content in that, and then I post on both platforms instead of you paying me to get promoted on there.
Did you always receive that quite well?
Yeah. Like it always worked, because it's value for value, and you got to be strategic when, like, obviously the goal would be to get to a place to where we're paying people. And obviously when I do like my shoots and stuff, we pay people. But obviously you got to figure out how to build, you know what I mean? So at the end of the day, it's about value exchange. So if we're helping each other, and that's the importance of ecosystem, because that's another thing I learned at Rock Nation. It's just like, I always say, even I had a conversation with my friend the other day, I was just like, you need to get to a level to where when you need something, it only takes one phone call. You know what I mean? And that's the level that those guys are at, because we come in and, to be honest, like I said, it's a startup, but because of the name and the reputation, one phone call, that's it.
And that's the hard work that people have done previously 100%. Over like X amount of years. I was just reading an autobiography of this guy called David Geffen. Have you heard of him?
Yeah.
You've heard of him?
Yeah.
Have you read his book?
Nah.
Oh my days.
Music exec guy, innit?
Music exec. Yeah. I'm going to borrow you the book.
Okay,
yeah, it's called The Operator. Bro, that guy, yeah, obviously he throws these tantrums to people, but all the time, pick up the phone,
that's
boom,
it.
Sort it out.
That's it.
And like, I would love that to be kind of my way of doing things, you know what I mean? But you got to do the hard gruff. You got to do the cold emails.
That's it. And I think that's the importance of building that ecosystem. Yeah. And like, I can't wait till us in the Black community we're at those kind of levels to where that's where it takes, because like I said, safe space and building community, because a lot of the time, especially with our community, we don't have enough economic power. You know what I mean? So when these kind of things happen, where it's just like the killing of George Floyd and these kind of things, we want the change, but we don't have the equity to demand the change. You know what I mean? So we're kind of almost somewhat begging for the equality.
That's the word
you know
that
what
was
I mean?
in my head, yeah.
Like it's a harsh word, but that's the reality of it. to where, like I said, like I haven't really even had these conversations publicly, but even like working at Rock Nation, it almost felt like, nah, this is your backup. So when you're going into to battle, or you've got the system that are saying, no, you're going to take this deal how we give it to you, we're like, nah, like, you know what I mean? This is how we're doing things, you know what I mean? Because we've got this knowledge, we've got this leverage, you know what I mean? Like when Jay's going into these rooms, he's dictating the terms, you know what I mean? Like in these big corporate rooms. And I was thinking, like these are the levels. Because even when I look at, like, for instance, like, it's interesting because, yeah, I've never said this kind of thing publicly, but even when you look at Vinicius Jr.
Who?
Vinicius Jr.
Vinny.
So obviously Vinny had the racial abuse. I don't know if you remember that. And at that time, it's just like, you're seeing that all these fans doing these chants. And at that time, I remember looking and thinking, it's like he's alone. And bear in mind, like, I'm not at Rock Nation anymore, but them then going and sign it, like, they basically bought out the agency that he's under. So now they represent him.
Who, Rock Nation?
Yeah. So like, I don't know if you saw, like, Jay-Z was at the game. And for me, a lot of people look at that as business, and I'll just look at it, no, it's protection.
That's exactly what I was thinking, yeah.
Even with what drives me in terms of with sportswear, and hopefully it gets to that day where I'm sponsoring teams, because you will see sort of the pandering. It's almost like the brands that were posting the black square during Black Lives Matter, to where Vinicius is going through racial abuse, and you'll have the big sportswear brand that sponsor him put out a statement just saying, "Oh, we back you." Like, that's nowhere near enough. Like, if I'm in that position, I'm the sportswear brand that's sponsoring the team, and I'm seeing that the monkey chants are coming from that team, and they're wearing your product. You know what I'm doing? I'm threatening. I'm saying, I'll pull the sponsorship. Like, that's, you know what I mean? That's what I talk about. We don't have the equity to demand the changes, because we didn't really see a change. You know what I mean? So even when I'm working at Rock, we're doing different things to where basically whenever something happens, injustice, we're saying, nah, this is how you do it. No, we demand this, and Jay and his team have the leverage to where they're going to listen and they're going to pay attention, you know what I mean? So because there are economic, like, there's a certain power that they have that, you know what I mean, you got to kind of take that seriously to an extent. It's just that we need more of it, you know what I mean? So when we've got various businesses at scale that can do that, then it's a different kind of dynamic, you know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, I'm always for collaboration, and I do believe in allyship, but allyship is equal, you know what I mean? Like, if you
it's not like I'm not homeless now.
Exactly, you know what I mean? So when you talk about allies, I always think about a general going to another general saying, there's this war on injustice, let's collaborate. Whereas the allyship term that comes around,
like it's a sponsor. It's
sponsor,
like
charity,
you're
you know what I mean?
to, like, I'm an orphan, come and take.
Exactly. So it's just like, you can come into our big offices and have your little room in the corner to discuss your like, I don't, you know what I mean? Like, so that's what's like, a lot of people are taking that path, and they feel like, don't get me wrong, we do need those people. But where I talk about strategies, that yes, we've got those people advocating and fighting for us here, but we need entrepreneurship here where we're building our own, to where, like one of the biggest things I always say is, the thing I love the most about doing what I do is, one, having the creative direction, creative freedom, but then also the peace of mind. Okay, I can pick who I work with. And to me, that's not predicated on like the amount of success that I have. To me, I do this full time, I'm successful. You know what I mean? I'm able to pick who I want to pick in terms of collaborations, work with this brand. This brand don't quite align with what we're doing, so say no to them. You know what I mean? Like, to have that kind of that
freedom.
Yeah, it's peaceful. You know what I mean? The peaceful path. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how I was definitely inspired by working at Rock, and then applying that to what I do, but then also seeing where it can be a tool. You know what I mean? Like I said with the example of Vinicius, like now it's a different, like, let something happen now and see what the ramifications are in terms of racial abuse. You know what I mean? When you've got a company behind you, because, you know what I mean? The club could say, yeah, we'll walk off the pitch, but you know what I mean?
About their own interests.
Yeah, because like you said, even with the Man City charges this and that. The owners are paying, you know what I mean? So the league are not going to do much. The club are not really going to do much. You know what I mean? So you need that backup. So a lot of the time it is going to be disruptive. You know what I mean? But at the end of the day, when it's your people, you having their back is the key thing. So that's why I was just like, on one hand, sometimes I'm conflicted because I'm just like, I understand what comes with trying to build something big. But then on the other hand, I'm thinking, right, look at the impact that could make. You know what I mean? In stuff like that, where you're you know what I mean? Because once these kind of things happen politically, like we'll see what's happened, like Palestine, all this, like now they're saying boycott these brands. You know what I mean? Like you've empowered them too, you know what I mean? So you understand that, okay, brands, there's a direct correlation with what happens in the world politically, and they say politics, but to me it's life. You know what I mean? There are battles, there are wars that are going on, you know what I mean? It's a cycle, you know what I mean? So when it's, it's politics, this is life, you know what I mean? So when you're a brand that you stand for something that is important just as much as the type of business you build, you know what I mean?
Bro, I could sit here and talk to you for ages. Like I've got so many more questions. I'll have to come back to you on this.
Yeah, we can do a part 2.
I think so. But I can see like the passion, as you're talking. Like I can feel it.
Because you know what, that's kind of what drives me. Because like I said, like our motto, wife, is move with purpose. You know what I mean? So however that looks, that's what dictates. Because like I said, when I look logically, trying to do a sports whip, like
it's hard.
You know what I mean? I'm going up against these giants. You know what I mean? It don't make sense, but where you're driven from something else that's more than just business, that's how, you know what I mean, you move differently.
Sick. Okay. So as we wrap up, I've got a couple quick fire questions for you.
Okay, cool.
So first one, what's one piece of advice you hear people give all the time, but when you hear it, you actually think it's bad advice?
Ooh, it's a good question. That's an interesting question, you know. Do you know what? I'd probably say follow your dreams, because to me it's a blanket statement. I think I'd probably say more find your dreams rather than follow, because there needs to be an intention to it. You know what I mean? Because like I said, my dream was to be a footballer, but I didn't feel like it was my dream until, you know what I mean, I sort of found my way.
I love that one. Find your dream. I like that one.
Until you really know yourself and dig deep.
How would you know what your dreams are?
How would you know? Yeah, because like it's a bit of an airy fairy statement, you know what I mean? And like until you put context to it, you know what I mean? So I'd say that.
All right. What's one tip or hack that helps you stay on top of your time management?
I'd say my fitness journey. So no matter how busy I am, I always have to work out. Because
every day?
I do 5 days a week. Because for me that sets the tone. And it's discipline, and just even how it affects me mentally when I don't work out compared to when I do, like the endorphins and stuff that you get. So I would say no matter the schedule, so that gives me the discipline.
Okay. What's one book or what's one book or film that you recommend to people the most?
Book, I'd say Shoe Dog, Phil Knight. Just even in terms of understanding patterns, because like I said, I consider myself an analyst, so understanding just the different patterns, because when Nike were building at that time, the market he was going into was niche, you know what I mean? So that's what I was like, okay, I can still replicate that now, you know, because sometimes we follow the big thing, you know what I mean, where like sometimes the gems in the shadows, you know what I mean? So I'd definitely say Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Film, I would say The Prestige. I don't know if
Oh, really?
Yeah, so a film by Christopher Nolan, one of my favorite directors. And I think I get a lot of inspiration from films, just in terms of like I say, perception and how things are presented in a way, you know what I mean, to make you look at something. It could be in plain sight, but you've not noticed it. until you get the hindsight to then notice it. You know what I mean?
I mean, I had that today when you told me about the football and controversy.
Exactly. That's what I think. Like for me, perspective is so powerful. You know what I mean? And I think that's the unique thing about life in general, because we all look at it in a different way, and then we also look at ourselves in a different way. So our perspective, everyone's perspective is unique to them. So it's about how then you utilize that, and I guess on the journey of life, how you, I guess, leverage that in a sense, you know what I mean? So understanding the value in that, because it comes down to self-value, and understanding just the importance of your perspective, no matter how big or small, like your perspective is important.
And then final question, what would your words of encouragement be to our listeners?
I would say trust yourself. Yeah, trust your intuition, trust your vision, and you'll find a way.
Love it. And then final question, where can people find you?
At YFitwear, and at Fit for the Culture.
Okay. Bro, it's been a pleasure.
That's
Thank
it,
you.